This is the third part of History and Legislation. It's called History and Legislation 3 of Special Education, the third section of the earlier history leading up to the history of today and the laws that we have. As you may or may not know, the case of Leary versus Riles was a case that was important in which African American students were tested in order to determine if they needed special education services or not. Their testing consisted only of an IQ test. An IQ test, as well as the achievement tests of today, as of that particular point of time, are geared to the white middle class individual. As a result, when we are testing African Americans, they do not have all the resources possibly as needed, and as well as the cultural characteristics on the test appeared that were not always in the cultural realm of those who were being tested, and those, of course, those who were African Americans. So therefore, what happened is these students were placed into special education, which would have been a special education class for individuals with mental retardation, now intellectual disabilities. Thus, there was a problem. It went in front of the court, and the court said one is not allowed to use only an IQ test in order to determine if a child needs special needs or not and special education services, but one must also use more than one test, more than one assessment. Therefore, in our full evaluation that we have now, in the full evaluation, the full assessment pieces that we have now, you start off with an IQ test. One then has an achievement test. One then has a diagnostic aptitude test, and then a criterion referenced test. A criterion reference test is the first test that actually tests skills. A skill would be being able to multiply 3 digits by 3 digits. That's a skill. Then curriculum-based assessments, which are teacher-made, and these teacher-made tests also evaluate skills to see if the person can actually do them. And then comes the curriculum-based measurement. The curriculum-based measurement is a test that tests how fast a person can do a particular skill. However, the skill has to be known first. The skill must be known first. Therefore, the CBA always goes first, and then comes the CBM. Now, these tests are done in connection with and association also with parent and teacher interviews, as well as the student being interviewed. That constitutes a full evaluation. This full evaluation is then used, and the scores placed, the grade levels placed into an evaluation report. The evaluation report information, which is all of this information of the full evaluation, is then placed into the IEP, on which the goals are based, on which the goals in the IEP are based. What do we want the child to learn? What do we want the child to do? Based on those goals, it is then decided where the child is going to be in the least restrictive environment and how much time the student is going to be with or without his or her non-exceptional peers. Okay, so that's the full evaluation, and it all came out of the Larry versus Riles. It's all connected with Larry versus Riles and the further assessments that we now need to give. In addition, we also have Hendrick Hudson versus Rowley. Hendrick Hudson versus Rowley was a girl who was deaf and had an interpreter in the class. She did well. Then she was moved to a first grade class, and in that particular class, she was doing quite well without an interpreter. The parents thought she still needed an interpreter. Went in front of court. The court said, well, if she's doing well enough, then she does not need an interpreter. Our case, is not that the child receives a luxury edition of education, but the average amount, at least the minimum amount of education. So therefore, that would be a luxury if the child has an interpreter. Okay, so therefore, we also know that an interpreter is a related service or a supported service. That is something that came out of this Rowley case. Then we have Honig versus Doe, in which some students with emotional behavioral disorders were having problems in the classroom. They could not be serviced in the classroom, and so they were kicked out of school. That's the bottom line. Okay, it went in front of court, and the court said that if a student is kicked out of school, okay, because of behavioral problems, their program must continue. Their program must continue if it is related to the disability. If it is related to the disability. Okay, so therefore we have a manifestation determination review. Now, here's a case of Kimberly. Okay, read the case carefully. Read it carefully and then respond 2.9. Which of the cases just discussed is this case related to? Case Martinique. Do the same thing. This is response 2.10. What case is the case of Martinique related to? Slow to read. Which case is slow to read related to? Place it in a response 2.11. Case Gregory. Do the same for Gregory. Response 2.12. Goudreau. Case Goudreau. Response 2.13. Which of those cases is this related to? May even be more than one. Be specific. Okay, response to intervention came as a result of that full evaluations take a long time, and it may be 6 months by the time the whole process is finished. Therefore, in IDEA 2004, we have something else. We have response to intervention as an added type of a way in order to distinguish if a person needs to be placed and or have special education services. Okay. There are just 3 facts that I'm going to say now. One is you need to have groups. Basic facts need groups. Okay, the groups are in Tier 2 and Tier 3. Groups are in Tier 2 and Tier 3. In other words, not in Tier 1, although you can start doing it there. Okay, so then you also have the basic principle that one needs to assess, one needs to monitor the progress at all times, Tier 1, 2, and 3. In Tier 1, we monitor the progress. not just with the standardized tests, but if we see that a student is not doing very well in the regular classroom, we start taking notes and documentation as to where the student may not be doing as well. Then in tier 2, we do it even more so that every 2 weeks, the child is assessed, is actually tested in some way or another, usually with a CBA, curriculum-based assessment, to see if the student knows the skills. And that's done on a bi-weekly basis, every other week. And report can be sent home then. Tier 3 is even smaller groups, and the interventions are even more intense. So therefore, there are 3 things. You need the groups, you need to assess, and you need interventions. Interventions may already start in tier 1, although that's not necessarily so. Tier 2, yes, you need intense interventions. Tier 3, you need even more intense interventions. Progress monitoring takes place all the time in order to document. Okay, some principles of IDEA. What are the 6 principles? They need to be known. You have to memorize them. 0 reject. No child may be rejected out of the school or from a school district that receives public funding. That's 0 reject. It is not just a philosophy, like your author says. It is an actual principle, like most other authors say. Free and appropriate public education. The education has to be free. It's paid by the tax dollars. But appropriateness is first. Appropriateness is always first. What is best for the unique needs of the child? Non-discriminatory identification and evaluation. This is what comes from the Larry versus Riles case. Child is to be assessed, and the assessment has to be non-discriminatory, not culturally biased. Has to be given in such a way that the student is assessed properly and can be placed properly. Least restrictive environment, LRE. The least restrictive environment says that the child must be placed as much as possible with her or his non-exceptional peers. The child should be placed as much as possible with his or her non-exceptional peers. Very, very important. That's why we have the continuum of services. The least restrictive environment is not just a general education classroom. It can be the resource room, because that's where the child is still with as many non-exceptional peers as possible, but the child needs that extra help and needs to be there. Therefore, appropriateness, as seen in Principle 2, appropriateness, what is best for the child, always is first, before the least restrictive environment. The least restrictive environment, as considered by full inclusionists, is the general education classroom. That's where the student stays all the time. But this is not so with the continuum of services. Okay, next one is due process. Due process means that the child is to be placed in the appropriate place, and it has to be done with the consent of the parent. A child may not be moved from one place to another place without initial consent of the parent. Confidentiality of the records is also part of the due process. No one should know who or what is in the records of the students who have special needs on their IEP. It's not to be shared with the community, not to be shared with the secretary, etc. Parent-student participation. We want to have the parents participate in all aspects of the processes. In the initial process, the pre-referral process, the response to intervention, give permission for assessments, give permission for placements, give permission for transitions. Everything has to go through the parents. The parents are the first teachers. The child is not the teachers. The child belongs to the parent. Students are to be at the IEP meetings as much as possible. Okay, and you'll see that in another YouTube video that you will see later on and are required to watch. Okay, some other legal aspects. Okay, child find. Child find is that we need to locate children from birth to age 21 who may have a disability. Very important there. Parents do not have to say that, but we do, according to law, we have to try to find them. If a parent disagrees with the school decision, let's say they want the student in having resource room services for a few hours a day, or there's a problem with due process, anything like that, with evaluation, then the parent may go to court with that after mediation. First you have mediation. You try to figure it out with just a small group and try to come to a conclusion. Okay? And in the case of that a child may not be assessed properly, a parent may ask for an independent evaluation. With an independent evaluation, another evaluator not related to the school will evaluate the child, will test the child, and a list of the evaluators or the possible testers that are available is given to the parent by the school district. A list of evaluators is given by the school district to the parents so that they don't have to try to find their own person to test their child independently. The school district pays for the cost. We'll just leave it at that. There's a little bit more to that, but we'll just leave it at that right now. Okay, the law, the 2004 law, also protects against frivolous lawsuits. In other words, it may not be that the student maybe wanted to be assessed by the parent, or the parents may want the student to be assessed like every 2 weeks. Well, that's ridiculous to do something like that. They have to give it time. They have interventions to do for 8 weeks or longer. Okay, so the law protects against that the school would have to hire a lawyer in order to protect them against the parents in this case, in order to try to help protect the child, which is the ultimate goal, of course. And so the attorney's fees are going to be returned to the school district. Okay, an IEP is important. It has a number of things that are very important for the child, for their program. First, it sets goals. What is to be taught to the child? What is to be taught to the child? Okay, based on the current levels of achievement and the progress that has been monitored. See how response to intervention comes into play here. That progress monitoring, document. You take notes all the time. Very, very important. Before the lesson, during the lesson, and after the lesson. Monitoring at all times, because we need those documents in order to figure out if the child really needs to have special education services, in what areas the child is doing well and what areas the child is not doing well. The individualized education program also sets placement, tells where the child is going to be and how much time. How much time is going to be spent in the general education classroom and how much time is going to be spent outside of the general education classroom. Okay, and then every year it is reviewed to see if the goals have been met or not. So every year it's reviewed, and then a re-evaluation. That means a full evaluation takes place every 3 years. A full evaluation takes place every 3 years. However, if after 3 years the child is doing rather well, and there are no major things, everything seems to be going well, then for students with learning disabilities and other disabilities, will only need a partial evaluation, re-evaluation. However, individuals who have an intellectual disability have to have the full evaluation, which includes an IQ test. The others don't have to have an IQ test, if the parents agree to that. Okay, now what I'd like you to do is I want you to watch a good IEP meeting on YouTube. And there is the actual address, the URL of the YouTube. Make sure you type it in correctly. And then for your response 2.15, write a brief reflective response about what you saw. Okay, about a half to 3/4 of a page, talking about introducing each other to each other. How is that done? When the student left, why didn't the student stay there all the time? Why do you think so? Or why do you not think so? What are some of the parent concerns that were voiced? How did they make agreements? How did they come to a consensus? What happened? How did they work that? What was the process? What are the goals and placements for the child? Okay? And why is this important? Because no matter who is watching this, if you're a teacher, you'll be attending meetings like this one in your future. That's how important this is, that you know all of this and why I spend so much time on this. So this is what I'd like you to do. Watch this, reflect on it, think about it after you observe it, and write your reflections. And think about, what would you do if you were in place of one of those people there? What if you were a parent? You might have a child with an exceptionality. You never know. The child might be born with a disability, or it might be acquired. And that can happen at college level as well. Like one of my former students had a stroke. Another student had other things possible with them. Okay, so here you go. Do this and enjoy the rest of your evening. Now, one more little thing is, what is special education? Do you